Welcome back to the Farmside Chat. This is Zippy Duval, American Farm Bureau President, farmer from Georgia. We're going to talk about something I know absolutely nothing about today. You all know that I talk to farmers all over the country and just have a good time learning what they do. I came to Farm Bureau thinking I knew everything there was to know about farming and realized that farming is so big and vast. I just knew my little piece of it. And it has been an unbelievable education and pleasure talking to the wonderful farmers and ranchers across this country. Today, we're going to be in Wisconsin, and we're going to talk to Amber Bristow. And she is a fifth-generation cranberry farmer in Wisconsin. And she also does the blog, and also involved with a podcast she's called Farming Forward. Just listened to one of your podcasts. I enjoyed it, and I know a lot more about cranberries now than I did before I listened to it. So we'll talk about our podcast a little later in the show. So thank you for joining us, and I know you're going to be excited to hear about this. We're coming up on Thanksgiving, and we'll talk about what role it plays in Thanksgiving in a few minutes. So thank you for being with us. Amber, would you please tell us a little bit about your multi-generational cranberry farm?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to educate you and your listeners about cranberries because they are such a huge staple in not only the Wisconsin culture, but the entire North American culture as well. So my family farm was founded back in 1918. And my great-great-grandfather came from a family that started growing cranberries in Wisconsin. And he helped kind of start the entire Wisconsin cranberry industry. So he was a part of that first movement in the early 1900s. And so when he landed on our home property, we started with just 11 acres of cranberries. And our soil is so sandy and acidic that we can't really grow anything other than cranberries here. So my family has done nothing but grow cranberries this entire time. And he had several children, and he was a very strong Irishman. And if you know anything about the Irish families, they all love each other, but they are very stubborn people, as most farmers are. So when the children grew up working out here, they knew that they wanted to continue with the cranberry industry, but they did not want to work together. So they kind of split up, and they all stayed within the area and started their own marshes surrounding ours. So they're all right next to each other in proximity, but far enough apart where they didn't have to see each other every day. And it's still the same way today. So with that 11 acres that we started with, we have expanded our family's farm to over 250 acres of just cranberries. So the marsh runs through my mom's side of the family. So my mom stuck around here. And when she met my dad, he had no prior farm background before he met her. So everything that he has learned about growing cranberries, he learned from my grandfather. So you can't go to school to learn about cranberry growing like you can with a lot of other agriculture industries. So there's no school that you can take to learn XYZ about cranberries. It's all kind of secondhand information. It's all taught from the generation before you. And the same with my husband. When I first met him, he had no prior agriculture background, and now he's working full-time for us as well and learning from my dad, just as I have. So it's really special. It's a very family hands-on business, and we've kept it going for 5 generations. And my husband and I just welcomed our first son, so the start of the 6th generation out here, and I'm excited to give him kind of the same childhood and the same upbringing that I got to experience. So excited to show him everything and teach him all the things that I've learned, and then some as well.
So do you have siblings that work with you?
I have an older brother. He is complete opposite of me. He is he works in politics. Let's leave it at that.
So he's not on the farm any.
He's not. He stays in the loop of things, but he's not a get down and dirty type of guy on his everyday job.
So what about your husband? Did you snatch him from the city and bring him to the country, or was he a country boy?
He lived in a city, not a big city, but he was involved in the archery business. So when he came out here for the first time to meet the family, I think he saw all of our support land, because we do have a lot of support land and a lot of woods around here. And I think he just saw white-tailed deer. He just started dreaming about hunting out here all the time. So that's how I got my hooks in him. And I think he's hunted out here maybe 2 or 3 times since we first got together. So it didn't work out the way he planned, but it still got him here.
Are you a hunter?
I am, yes. We're in the middle. Our gun season is coming up next weekend, so we're getting ready for that.
So you know that country song, she can hunt, she can kill a deer and run a trot line.
Yes, that's me. We do it all.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Tell us a little bit about the growing season of a cranberry.
Well, there's a lot to learn, so I'll try to condense it down as much as I can. So cranberry is a perennial plant, so it grows all year round. And right now, we just wrapped up our harvest season. So right at the end of October, we try to finish up by Halloween. And after that harvest, there's already buds formed for next year's crop. And as soon as the berry is picked off of the vines go dormant themselves. So they just sleep all winter long, which I kind of wish I could do sometimes. And during that time, we need to protect those buds from freezing off over the harsh winters that we have here in Wisconsin. So when we first start getting those really cold temperatures, like below zero, or we have really strong wind chill, we'll actually use water to protect the vines from that element. So we will flood up the cranberry. So when I talk about a cranberry bed, let's talk about terminology first before I lose you completely. A cranberry bed is basically the plot where the vines are growing in. So we're in a marshy area and we have a high water table. So we dig the cranberry beds down into the ground, probably about 6 to 8 feet total. So that way, when the vines are planted, their roots are closer to that groundwater. So they're always getting water that way. So it's easier for us to flood and move water around as the beds are kind of dug into the ground. It's just easier gravity wise. So we flood up those beds with about 24 inches of water until the vine tips are just under the surface of the water. And we let that water sit for 7 to 10 days. And then we pull any remaining water off, and that water will hopefully freeze into a layer of ice. And as any water that didn't freeze gets pulled off, the ice will kind of settle on top of the vines and act as a protector, or like a blanket from that cold wind, that cold temperature, any snow that we might get. And that just keeps the vines insulated all winter long. So then it doesn't freeze the buds off. We do that process a couple of times throughout the winter until we have about 12 to 14 inches of ice build up on every single bed that we have. And cranberries grow, like I mentioned, in a very sandy, acidic soil out here. So when we have that layer of ice built up, we'll fill dump trucks up with sand, and we do this process called sanding. So we fill the trucks up with sand and then drive them onto the beds on top of that ice. And we'll spread about a 1/4-inch layer of sand on top of that ice. So when the ice melts in the springtime, that sand will filter through the ice, filter through the vines, and kind of push any vines down into the ground. And then that will cause the vines to sprout new roots. And then that creates a healthier growth throughout the season. So we have a rotation every year. We try to get like 1/3 of our property done every single year. So it's about 3 years from the time that it gets sanded until the next time that it gets sanded, if that makes sense. And then that also acts, that sand will hopefully suffocate any bug eggs that might be laid that survived the winter. Hopefully it kind of suffocates those. And it's just a natural way that we protect against bug control later on in the spring as well. So once we first start getting those warm temperatures in the spring, the vines start coming out of dormancy. So they turn from a deep maroon color to a bright, lush green color as they start waking up and start growing again. So in the springtime, we're really mindful of any frost damage. In the springs, once it starts warming up, once we have consistent 70-degree days, usually is when the vines start coming out of full dormancy, but they're really susceptible to frost damage during that time as they're starting to come out of that dormancy. So we have irrigation systems set up in every single bed. And when it gets cold overnight, especially, we'll turn that irrigation system on. And then that running water will keep the frost from sticking to the plant and freezing anything off and causing too much damage. So what we have to do during that time is we have different shifts for all of our full-time employees. About 2 hours every night is someone's shift, and they have to drive around constantly and check those sprinklers to make sure nothing is freezing up, because if a sprinkler freezes up that whole area that is now unprotected, it can freeze very quickly, and then it will kill those buds, and we will not have a crop in that area that's not getting water. So that's kind of like our spring project. And then all summer is just watching the fruit grow. So those buds will start developing into blossoms, usually around like Father's Day, middle of June. And then we are seeing the first fruit form, usually around the 4th of July. And then from there, it's just watching the fruit grow, applying any fertilizers as needed. And then October is obviously our harvest season. So harvest is a pretty big deal. Well, first of all, cranberries don't grow in water. I should have started with that. That's kind of the big misconception surrounding the cranberry industry. And the only time we're using water is during the winter months, like I mentioned, and to irrigate, and then during harvest. So during the harvest process, we will start by adding about 6 to 8 inches of water to a select few area of beds. We're not doing everything all at once. We're just doing certain blocks at a time. So we add that 6 to 8 inches of water, and then we come in with a tractor called the harrow. And this tractor for us, it looks different on every single farm that you go to, because the cranberry industry is so small and so specialized, that a lot of times the growers themselves are the ones fabricating their own equipment, just because no one else is making it for us. It's so small. So this tractor for us, it has rakes on the front and on the back of this tractor. So they look like little metal fingers, and he will drive into the bed with the water. And then those rakes just drop down to the ground and comb the berries right off the vines. It's a very gentle process. And then that extra water that's on the beds right now, it kind of disperses the weight from the tractor onto the vine, so it's not such a harsh pressure. And as he's driving in a straight line on the opposite end, the beds are built in like a long, skinny rectangle. So he drives down on metal ramps, so he's driving straight in. And then on the opposite end, there's another set of metal ramps where he can drive straight out, and then he'll kind of make a loop around the end and then take those metal ramps back in and drive straight out the opposite end. So that way he's not making turns in the bed, because if you're making turns on that wet ground, it's likely to tear the vines up and cause some damage. So we're being as gentle as possible with everything that we're doing. And after he gets all the fruit combed off of the vines, that's when we add in an additional 24 inches of water to get those berries floating up out of the vines and floating on the surface of the water. So cranberries float because if you crack them open and look inside, there's little air pockets that create, little air bubbles that allow the cranberries to float to the surface of the water. So that's why we're using water during the harvest process. It's just because it's easier for us to maneuver the fruit around. So once all of that fruit is floating, we'll take 2 tractors and we'll just basically corral them together using what we call a cranberry boom. And it's the same material that's used for oil spills, if you're familiar with that. Yeah. So we'll take that and we'll just drive tractors along the length of the bed and pin them into one corner using these corrals. And then we come in with another piece of equipment. It's called the berry pump. It's kind of hard to describe other than it's just a giant vacuum cleaner. So there's this arm that goes out into the water, and on the bottom of this arm is a pan that sits right below the surface of the water, and that's where the cranberries get sucked up. And on top of that pan, there's a metal square bar that's spraying water on top of the cranberries during this entire time. So that thought process is that water is cleaning the fruit already in the water. So it's removing any leaves or sticks, anything that's not a cranberry basically, and just kind of cleaning it in the water before it gets sucked up. It gets sucked up this large tube, and it goes up onto this large platform. And in this platform, there's a big metal bin where all this water and all the cranberries are getting sucked up into. And then all that fruit will go down a little slide, and it goes into the back of a semi truck. And from there, it goes, for us anyway, for my family, it goes from the bed straight into the semi truck, and then it goes straight into ocean spray coolers, where all of our fruit is used to be processed into juices, sauces, and sweet dried cranberries. So from the time that the first fruit is picked off of the vine until it hits a cooler at Ocean Spray, it's about a 48-hour turnaround. So it's pretty quick. And then after all of that fruit is picked up, we pull any remaining water off, and then cycle it back into the pond or reservoir where it came from until we can move to the next block. So to summarize, that's the entire growing process in a nutshell.
So I guess the interesting thing is you use water to insulate them.
We do.
Yeah, that I would have never thought that, and then I never would have thought you'd put sand on them either. Yeah. So, but you said the sand goes on about every third year.
Correct. Yeah. So they're built. The beds are built on sand right now. They used to. We have really sandy soil. We also have that really dark peat, that stinky dirt. So that's what we used originally. But we found that stinky dirt just holds way too much moisture for cranberries to grow well. That would cause a lot of weed growth, just things that we didn't want growing in with the cranberries. Whereas with the sand, it filters water a lot better. And we've done studies where we check water before it reaches the cranberries versus after it gets filtered through the vines and filtered through that sand. And the water is cleaner after it gets filtered through the sand and through the vines than it is when it first reaches them. So it works great for us, and it's very fortunate that we have that poor soil because cranberries love it. So it's great for everybody here.
Yeah, your rake you described, which is on a tractor, sounds like the same type of rake they use in those low bush blueberries in Maine, but they do it by hand there.
Yeah.
They have some machines, but they're smaller. So.
And that's kind of how this piece of equipment came to be. I think it's very similar. We have before we started using this, we had to do everything by hand, obviously, and it started out using a hand rake. So it was basically like a crate with metal teeth on the front, and you would just have to stand there and rake everything from that. And then that became more mechanical, so they added wheels, and so it was kind of like a cart, and there was just spinning rakes. And I think that's kind of similar to what the blueberry pickers use now. So it's just kind of like a push behind rake, right, and it would just spin and collect the fruit that way. And so that was kind of the thought process on making this larger rake on a tractor. So it's just the same thing, but bigger and easier to operate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all interesting, and most people don't really understand. If they think farmers grow a crop and they harvest it, and then they go hunting and fishing or sleep the rest of the winter, that's not really what happens. There's a lot of things that has to be done after harvest and pre-planting to get ready and plan for the next season in just about anything that you grow or produce. So I know that a lot of my listeners are very interested in sustainability, and so I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about some of the sustainability practices you use on your farm.
Yeah, this is huge, especially for Ocean Spray. I think they are one of the first 100% sustainably grown crops. So Ocean Spray is a family, it's a grower-owned co-op. So the growers own the company, and that's something that we don't take lightly. So sustainability is the name of our game out here, and I think water is the biggest thing that is so sustainable. I mean, there's a reason why there's so many multi-generational families involved in the cranberry industry. Is we're always mindful of what we're using, how we're using it, and how we can make it better. So one way that we try to better our sustainability efforts every year is we work really closely with the University Extension Program of Wisconsin. So we have a lot of scientists come out here and help us in that sense. So they're always looking for ways to lessen our water use if we can. So they do studies and they say, okay, you're using this much water. What would happen if we push that back a little bit? So can you change the nozzles on your sprinklers to use less water? And then keep track of what you're using, keep track of if that affects the vine growth throughout the summer, or in the winters, can we maybe not use an earlier application during that first original flooding process? Can we see how cold the vines can get before they start to freeze? So maybe you're being a little bit more, maybe we can anticipate, colder temperatures before we have to start flooding. Whereas now we're kind of a little bit gun shy, oh, it's getting cold. We need to apply that water. And they're trying to say, well, hold on, let's see how cold the temperatures actually can get before you need to apply water for the first time. So we're also trying to figure out ways with our fertilizer applications. It's hard for us to have the same type of equipment, that precision applications that like larger crops, like row crops have now, where it's just spot treatments. We're trying to figure out a way in how we can do that as well. Again, we're so specialized that we don't have the same type of funding that a lot of these larger crops do. So we're trying to figure that out ourselves. So water, again, like I mentioned, it's a lot cleaner after we use it than when we first get it. We're always keeping track of water use. I have to send in a report to our DNR on how much water we're using every single year, figure out the math on how long our pumps are running. And the way that we figure that out is we have these moisture tensiometers set up throughout our property, and that tests the moisture in our soils. So we can constantly see, you know, maybe this bed and this block, this has had enough water, so maybe we don't need to run our irrigation in the summer for quite as long as we did the day before, just because it's holding that moisture. Or if it's, you know, if it was a dry day versus a not so dry day, we have different ways of checking to see our moisture levels so we can hold back on water if we need to. So those are just a few examples, I guess, of our ways that we can be a little bit more sustainable and hopefully make things a little bit easier for the next generation as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that's not close to agriculture. They don't really realize that you may be pumping that water and putting in there, but it's not 100% consumptive. I mean,
right.
You probably 70 or 80% of it's going right back into the water table.
Right. And that's kind of the thing. I guess people don't have a lot of negative things to say about the cranberry industry, but the ones that do, they're just totally misinformed because they think they see us using water and they think that it's getting wasted somehow. But it's like, no, any water that we are using, it gets filtered right back into groundwater. So it's not like we're letting it sit out there and just go to waste. I guess it's a plant. We can't leave it sit underwater like that. So everything that we do, we try to reuse and recycle. Even like our renovation projects that we do. So after the final harvest of a bed, we'll tear up all of that old material. We'll dig up all of the vines, all that old soil, and we save that. We reuse that for any road repairs that we might need in the future. If we have some dikes or dams that start kind of breaking apart at the edges, we go in and repair with that old dirt that we have saved. So again, everything that we have, we find new ways to reuse and recycle it.
So go back a little bit and talk about a little bit about the terminology. You talked about beds. I know that some people call them marshes and bogs. What's the difference?
Well, so the main difference, a marsh and a bog are kind of just a regional difference. There is some technical difference between a marsh and a bog. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I don't want to give any bad information, but marshes are more of the Wisconsin terminology and a bog is kind of the coastal terminology. Don't know the difference. But a bed is, so the marsh for us is the entire property, whereas the bed is just the individual area where the cranberries are grown in.
So in 250 acres of beds, how many different beds are there? I mean, obviously it's not one 250 acre bed.
Yeah, I want to say we have like 95 individual beds. So like the average size is about 2 acres.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah. So it ain't like you go out there and harvest in a day or two.
Yeah, it's taking about 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a lot of moving around.
Right. So, corn, cotton, soybeans, there's so many different varieties, all different kind of plants. Tell us about varieties of cranberries. And when we have Thanksgiving lunch, what cranberry are we eating?
There's a lot of different varieties, but to like the normal consumer, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the two. For us as growers, what we're looking for in different varieties is basically the harvest intervals is what we're looking for. So we have like an early variety, a standard variety, and then a late harvest variety. So the earlier varieties, they turn color a little bit earlier in the season. So kind of similar to apples, where we need cold temperatures for that fruit to turn a deep dark red color. So as that fruit is forming on the vine, the vines produce little uprights, and those uprights are what produce the fruit. So on one single upright, we can get anywhere from 1 berry to maybe 6 off of one single upright. So on top, there's going to be the foliage. So the leaves are going to be growing at the top, and then the fruit grows just below the leaves. And during those summer months, as that fruit is exposed to the sunlight, they start out green and then they turn kind of like a white color. And then as they're exposed to sunlight, they start to get sunburned. And that's what starts that red color process. And then as the days go on, they get a little bit more red, a little bit, they start blushing a little bit into a pinker color. And that cold temperature is what really turns a fruit a deep, dark red color that you're used to seeing. So the fruit that's grown at the top of the vine is a fruit that turns color first, whereas the fruit that grows closer to the bottom, closer to the ground, that's the last to turn color. So if you ever have gotten fresh cranberries and have seen a white berry or a green berry in there, it's not necessarily not ripe. The way that you test the ripeness of a cranberry is by looking inside and looking at the seeds. So if they're a green color, not ripe, but if they're brown, they're good to go. So it's all about what's inside that matters with a cranberry. So just throw it in your refrigerator and it'll turn color eventually. But the earlier varieties, they don't need as cold of temperatures as like the later harvest or the later varieties. And that just makes it easier for us. We're not harvesting everything all at once. The earlier varieties we can harvest middle of September sometimes. The standard varieties is first part of October to mid-October, and then the late varieties are kind of the tail end of October. So that's kind of the only difference in varieties, and maybe the size and shape of the fruit as well.
So that riser, how long is that? How tall is that riser?
It's a low running vine. So it's maybe 6 to 8 inches tall total. It's very
You talked about foliage being on top. Does that foliage come off at some point in time and expose them to the sun, or does they just get exposed day after day after day?
It just gets exposed day after day. The leaves don't really fall off like it does on a tree. They're always just going to be there, unless that plant gets damaged somehow, and then they might fall off. But they grow right back, so it's okay.
Can a cranberry get too ripe?
Yes, they can. So if we miss a berry during harvest, you can go out there like now and they'll be soft. They'll get too ripe, and if they just kind of ferment in their juice, I guess it's a weird way of saying it, but they just get soft and the flesh starts to break down, and it just turns into a rotten berry, and they're not great tasting.
So do you have to manipulate the maturity so that they all mature at the same time?
No, we can't do that. I wish we could sometimes. This year was kind of a weird harvest for us. This was the first time that we were waiting on color. So with Ocean Spray, they pay based off of your color. That's kind of the first thing that they look for. So if you aren't reaching your color levels that they want, we're not going to get paid as well as if we were in that peak window of redness, I guess. So this was the first year that it didn't get cold enough for us in October, the first part of October. So we kind of had to sit on our thumbs and wait for those colder temperatures to turn color. We couldn't really manipulate that in any way, as much as we wanted to. So it's all just a waiting game, as farming is most of the time.
You mentioned Ocean Spray, so let's talk about marketing a little bit. So when I think of Ocean Spray, I think of juices. Is that where yours goes?
Yeah, all of our fruit goes in to be processed. So we don't really have a control of what happens to it after we send it in, but we do know it goes in for processing. So juices, sauce, sweetened dried cranberries. Only about, I want to say, like 3 to 5% of all cranberries grown are sold for fresh fruit. And their harvest process for the fresh fruit is a lot different than it is for ours that is going in for processed. So I mean this in the nicest way. Our fruit it's allowed to get dinged up a little bit, so it's a little bit not rougher, but it goes through more steps than the fresh fruit harvest, because you want that fruit looking pristine as it reaches the consumer. So it's a completely different process than what we're doing here. So all of our fruit goes in for processing, and that's just what works for us the best.
Well, Thanksgiving is coming. There's going to be a lot of cranberries used. So, how important is Thanksgiving to the marketing of cranberry?
I think I think Thanksgiving and the holidays are like the Super Bowl of the cranberry industry. It works out perfect because our harvest it lines up right with the holidays, and that's kind of what we play off of. But I'm not like for me personally, I freeze cranberries. I take crates of cranberries every year during harvest and I freeze them. Cranberries do freeze really well. So if you are a fan of fresh cranberries, buy in bulk while you can because it's a very seasonal fruit. You can't find fresh cranberries all year round. They don't work well with the grocery stores in that sense. So if you're a fan, buy them, freeze them, throw them in your freezer. They'll last for the entire year. Or if you want them just in your refrigerator, they'll last about 6 to 8 weeks. But I always try to encourage people to use them all year round, and not think of them just as a holiday fruit, but to enjoy cranberries all year round. I mean, there's so
So,
many
how,
different health benefits. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't be eating them all year.
yeah. So, is there a proper way to freeze them, or is it pretty simple?
I mean, if you buy a bag of, I don't want to just limit you to Ocean Spray. I'm here to promote all cranberries, but if you buy a bag of cranberries in the store, you can freeze them. Just throw the bag in the freezer. But I like to
Oh,
wash them off, wait for them to dry completely, and then throw them in like a freezer bag. Lay them flat, so they're easier to store in your freezer, and then just pop them right in there. But
okay.
freeze them once, don't freeze them twice.
Okay. That's good information. So, we talk a lot about asking our farmers to tell their story because people so much want to know where their food comes from and the people that grow it and how they treat it, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to be transparent and make sure people understand because the misconceptions come from lack of understanding, and so we are pushing, especially our younger farmers like you, to get on social media and use that very effective but doesn't really cost anything to do, just costs you time and effort. I know you're very active on social media. I just looked at I think it was your Instagram account, and I noticed that you do a lot of recipes, and you talk a lot about what we just talked about. So tell us a little bit about your blog and your Farming Forward podcast.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I started my Instagram account first when I moved back home and started working on the marsh full time. I wasn't really seeing a lot of cranberry representation out there, and I was kind of getting sick of all the misconceptions surrounding the cranberry industry. And I thought, I've got a phone, I can take pictures, I can share my life day to day as a cranberry grower and let people know that there's so much more that goes into our industry outside of harvest and show the cool things that we're doing that people have no idea about. And so that's how this whole thing started. I never had any idea it would take off the way that it did. And I'm very thankful that more people can sit around their dinner tables and tell their parents, tell their grandparents, be like, hey, did you know cranberries don't grow in water? And to hear those stories from other people, from things that they've learned from my page, is like the biggest compliment anyone could ever give me. So it's really cool just to share that with whoever it reaches. If it reaches one person, great. If it reaches thousands of people, even better. I just worked with Carhartt for a video and saw that it got shared on the Carhartt page. To amplify it and reach even more people by working with brands like that is such a cool feeling. So that's kind of how this whole thing started, is just by wanting to educate people on how cranberries are grown, how they can use them in their daily life, and how I can help people just enjoy cranberries as much as I did. So right now, with the holidays coming up, I'm running this contest on my page where I ask people to send me their favorite cranberry recipes or recipes that they found online that they haven't tried yet. Just anything with cranberries in your recipe, send it to me. And I organize it into different categories. So we have like an appetizer round, a main dish round, side dish, drinks, desserts, whatever. And I'm having my followers vote on which recipe sounds best to them. and they'll go through another round. And the final round is going to be the top 2 recipes in each round. I'm going to make myself have a big smorgasbord of cranberry foods, and then I will be the final say in which recipe is best that people should try this holiday season. And just kind of get people excited about incorporating cranberries into a bunch of different meals that they might not have tried before.
So you're running a contest too?
Yes, I'm putting together a little prize package for the lucky winner, and sending them like all things cranberry, shirts, merchandise, anything I can find, cookbooks, and sending that out to the winner is a little bit more of an incentive to get people to submit more recipes.
That's awesome. So on your podcast, you said you coupled with a dairyman.
Yeah, she's a dairy farmer from Southwest Wisconsin that I met through Instagram. She worked at a dairy farm since she graduated college, and she didn't grow up on a farm. So I think she has a really unique story on how she kind of got into that role. And now she recently left that position on this dairy farm, and her husband have some cattle at home that they raise, and now she is in more of the sales side of dairy. So she's working with a company and promoting their dairy products as well. So she's kind of getting the full circle side of the dairy industry. So to hear her transition from not being involved in agriculture to being in a dairy farm for so long, and now selling it, and then coming home and working a full-time job on her family's farm as well. It's a really fun dynamic to hear kind of all sides of the dairy industry from her perspective.
So you sparked my interest in a comment you made a while ago. I don't know whether it was on the program or off, but you said y'all did a podcast about horseradish. Someone growing horseradish and ginseng. So I gotta learn about that, and we don't have enough time to talk about it. So I'm going to ask you to tell everyone how they can find your podcast so they can go listen to that.
Yeah, so we have new episodes come out every Tuesday. You can find us on your favorite podcasting streaming platform and on YouTube. Just search Forward Farming, and you'll see us pop up.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. Very interesting commodity that I grow, but I want everybody to look at this screen and see this wonderful young farmer who's dedicated her life to growing something that you can enjoy, not just during holidays, but all year long.
That's right.
She told you how to do that. And we very much are very proud of her and all the young farmers that we have across this country. Not all of them my age. A lot of them are her age, and they're dedicating their life to making sure that they can fill your pantries each and every day. And that's why it's important to support agriculture and support farmers and support the policies that help us, like the Farm Bill, because the Farm Bill touches every farmer, every person in America's life in many, many different ways. And if you don't know much about that, just look it up. Read a little bit about the Farm Bill and how important it is to everyone in America. So thank you for joining me today and listening and learning about cranberries. And we both hope you have a wonderful day. And I say God bless you, and see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Farmside Chat. Please be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, take a minute to rate and review the podcast. This helps us continue to bring you farm fresh content that everyone can enjoy. Until next time, thank you and God bless you.